Okay, so in this lesson, this is an introduction to the comparing cultures with the mini cases, and I have a tool here for you to go to use in that process, and it's a nice tool to think about, using when you're thinking about preparing for, evaluating, particularly I think in a multicultural team setting. This is even more complex because now we're not necessarily working with people from one culture, but from multiple cultures. Although in the many cases, we're going to keep this fairly easy and have it just be with one culture from the country that you're studying for your foreign country manual. But the tool that I'm going to suggest you at least start with is to think about this MBI model from Joe DeStefano and Martha Masnevsky. They were, among other things, authors of the Personal Cultural Orientations article it read for the first week of class. But MBI stands for, MBI stands for Map, Bridge, and Integrate. And it's just a model to think about, if we're looking at scenarios to try to think about what might be the source of some challenges interculturally. What do we need to do to kind of come across and try to overlap those Venn diagrams a little bit, and then ultimately integrate our differences to be able to build on those. So let me talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, but ultimately what we're trying to do is build cultural bridges to think about skills and systems. So identify the skills and contributions of everyone involved. So in the many cases, most of the time I was able to identify and create a case that was U.S. with another country, but at least in one, I think it's your foreign country with yet a third party or different country. But what's important to think about is what should both parties be doing, right? In reality, we can only control ourselves and our processing of the information and our adaptation. But when you're thinking about these cases, I think one thing I would ask you to do is to present, what could the other party do? What could they be sort of reaching on and understanding as well about the protagonist from the U.S. or from the third country. So this bridging idea is, kind of building, what are the basic pillars in each country? What are the sort of priors and automatic performance that is expected? Those are sort of on the, the pillars of the bridge. And then think about, like, how can there be some, where could the easy adjustments be to sort of meet in the middle and to try to bridge those differences? So that's what I'm trying to have you think a little bit about this framework for the MBI frame. So if we simplify what this is trying to do, it's trying to get us to, recognize differences, but just try to value those. Like, what could be the benefit of having a person who has that particular cultural framework or approach to work? How could that help us actually be better at work? So first of all is to sit down, and if you've got two situations, to map it. Now, if you're in a multicultural team situation, you're going to have to think about mapping each and every one of those different locations that your team members are from to try to think about where are the alignments likely to occur, where are some of the gaps likely to occur. And then this bridging idea is this decentering. Like, how do you communicate across the differences? Where is the way that you can tap into something about yourself or tap into some recognition about kind of what the other's expectation might be to kind of come across that bridge? And again, I think the bridge metaphor is a nice one. It's kind of like we're not trying to get the full overlap of the Venn diagrams. We just want to come to some place to meet in the middle. When all of us should be trying to adapt in a certain way to communicate across those differences. And then ultimately, in the best case scenario is to figure out, we do have similarities, and let's find those and leverage those. There's much more similarity than there is difference, and can we come to some conclusion about how do we tap into that? And then also to recognize that the differences matter, and it's helpful to us because people may be noticing things that are subtle in the situation that could actually help create creativity or novel solutions. So it's as much about, in a way, kind of this decentering, is to try to take ourselves away from the us versus them, take ourselves away from cultural cruise control, and think about where are the benefits of the fact that there is a different perspective out there by the person we're working with or the people we're working with if it's in a multicultural team. So, one of these things, goes right back to CQ knowledge, is that you need to learn about the cultures of those team members. You need to invest some time in reading some things. That is beyond what we've already talked about with just dimensions and stereotypes. It's why if you're working with people from a particular part of the world, get yourself involved. Try to learn some things about what's going on politically, weather-wise, what are kind of the major holidays that are happening. Read The Economist, kind of understand some basic things that are going on in that society. Think about bringing in that cage framework, and particularly in relationship-focused societies, spend some time talking to people to learn more about them as a whole person, not just about the task that you're trying to work on together. You have to elevate those listening and observation skills, looking for subtle differences. And, if people are kind of thinking one way, it's okay to talk about it and ask about the assumptions. If I didn't already say that, I think there's situations I've seen where, a team has actually said, hey, we all have different approaches. We should share some of the variations in meeting styles. Now, this kind of thing will work obviously much better when we're talking about meetings of peers. When we have high power distance, it may be a little more difficult and take more time to get that kind of information from people who are lower power, lower status subordinates. Asking why, right? Why is this happening? Why is this the perspective? What's going on? And not necessarily always assuming right away that it's culture. But being aware also of our own cultural assumptions are really important here. Check on it. Check on people who aren't on your team. Talk to those trusted mentors and advisors. Do you think this is what's going on? Do you think this is what's causing the problem? Right? Ask those kinds of questions. Bridging is not assuming that the best ideas come from your culture, right? Hopefully we've already dispelled that. That's ethnocentrism. It's not going to be very helpful. You have to recognize yours is just one way, right? If we go back to one life, multiple lives, all these different things, people approach the world resolving problems, but kind of with different levels of interest on different levels of values that are not necessarily good or bad. Treating everybody else like a second-class citizen, that they need to learn how to do it right? Those are not going to be very effective ways to bridge. And in fact, that's sort of asking people to walk over to your side completely and not meet someplace in the middle. And being very careful that you don't just boil people down to stereotypes. By now, hopefully that's all very clear and never was a place you were starting from in the first place. But, this is what we're not trying to do in the bridging. It does mean trying to be open and respectful, recognizing that no matter what, usually it's helpful to build trusting relationships. Even in task-oriented cultures, having a relationship with people will give more benefit of the doubt and allow maybe a little bit more almost like self-deprecation about when things just go wrong and there's some misunderstandings, that we can recover from those a little bit more quickly. Acknowledge differences. Really ask people open-ended questions. Try to sort of seek an understanding of where they're coming from and recognize the underlying issue. We have to think about people as individuals. Remember that we all are a product of multiple socializations, and even in the same countries and cultures, we don't have the same families, the same religions, the same school experiences, the same work cultures, etc. So people are a bundle of different things, and again, it might open the door for similarities, right? To find out, oh, you both worked in X industry, or somebody had this experience in this educational process, right? There's a place where you can find that connection. Also, if it's a team, most of these scenarios are not teams that I'm giving you in the mini cases, but if you're thinking about a multicultural team, you're going to have to think about more than two cultures, right? It's not just one or two. Remember what we talked about with language rules, right? Set the expectations if there's a lingua franca or common language, but be sensitive to the fact that people are going to be cognitively drained working in a second language. This is a part of bridging in terms of communication. And when we get to the I, the integrating, leveraging differences, we can come back to sort of trying to pull away from the immediate interaction or challenge and move up to a superordinate goal. Like, what is that we're really trying to jointly accomplish here, to pull things away from maybe what one approach is versus another approach? How do we find a way to blend our approaches to come to the goals we're really trying to address? What are the basic things that have to happen in the outcome? What are those critical specifications? Meta-knowledge is not just about culture, but it's also about who knows what. And in a team, especially in a multicultural team, trying to really identify experts, because we sometimes can, as we learned, equate expertise with language proficiency, and that may not be true. So making sure that everybody in a team, especially a multicultural team, is aware of the background, the training, the experiences, and the expertise that each person on the team has can help people get beyond maybe what feels like a frustration of communication, whether that's from proficiency or from cultural differences in style, to try to access the knowledge that people have. If you can, reduce power distance, that's a good thing, especially in high power distance cultures. But be careful, right? You can't just decide that you tell people we're all the same here. That's not going to work very well. But sometimes that could be things like in the conflict lesson we talked about, having opportunities for people who are of same rank to talk together without the presence of a leader, working on more consensus-driven decision styles, but allowing people in the similar rank to offer their suggestions offline or independently. Those are ways to simulate equal power, to try to get the input from people you might need who might not otherwise share it. And identify opportunities for feedback, but recognizing what we talked about, that sometimes that may require allowing more indirect or offline feedback to occur. So, if a scenario is that there's a challenge happening face-to-face right now, part of what you might need to suggest in certain situations is that you give people time to go away, you give people time to kind of come back with their responses, take it out of a face-to-face open meeting in front of others, those kinds of things. So think about what you've learned about the cultural differences in communicating and in disagreeing and in evaluating and in deciding, and then adjust how the feedback can happen. So it is still possible to get it to happen. You just might need to change the scenarios and expectations of when that's going to occur and how that's going to occur. So now when it comes down to this activity, every one of your groups has a case. It's posted on the Canvas website with the country that you're interested in. You should each read this case individually, and I would suggest, practicing that CBT a little bit. Think through, like, what's the automatic reaction to this as an individual preparation. Then get together as a group and discuss the case, hopefully in a Zoom meeting or some other format. And using the grid here of MBI, think about the behaviors and thoughts exhibited by each party. Actually, what I meant by the grid is inside the PowerPoint presentation with the mini case, there's two slides. One is the case itself, and one is a grid that helps you kind of map out what you're observing from yourself and the other, from each protagonist in the case. And then on the 2x2, what are some skills and behaviors that you could actually do to resolve the challenge that's depicted in the case. Consult the country cluster information. They're not in the following slides. They're posted also on Canvas. There's one PowerPoint deck where I have used a tool that Erin Meyer has created to show how your countries map on each of those dimensions on communicating, deciding, conflict, etc. And then generate a 2-slide presentation and record your summary of what you discussed and what you learned. And in that, identify at least 1 to 2 things that each party, right? So on the bridge, moving from the pillars could do to have improved the situation depicted in the case. Okay, so I'll share this again, but basically this is what you're going to be doing is go to the Canvas site, open up that presentation, read the case, and start filling in the grid a little bit independently. Schedule a meeting, have a conversation, discuss the case, create 2 slides, maybe 3, and record a little presentation that you upload to Canvas. And I'll have to follow up on exactly where you put that so it's a place that everybody can see that. But let's do that, okay? Thanks, and have fun with the mini cases.